This has been a short camp meeting for South Central this year.
That's right, Wednesday.
And we started Wednesday, and tomorrow, Doc, they're going home. So at the end of tomorrow, when they go home, people are leaving here, and they're going back to churches that over the last 2 years, they started out at one point being totally closed, shut down. Mm-hmm. Then they opened up a little bit, and then they opened up all the way, some of them.
Yeah.
And what our people are finding since we've opened up is it looks like they're still only opened up partially. And so that question about, what is this going to look like? What are some of the things that you shared with the folk today in your workshop that's going to benefit them, and how do they wrap their heads around this current almost post-pandemic reality in their churches?
Some of this might be a blessing in disguise. The reality is our churches have been shrinking for years. This is no recent development. It's not just an Adventist challenge. We have been having problems with attendance and baptisms and church growth for decades now. If you look at the numbers, and I just did a couple of weeks ago, E-Adventist, some other research from the Barna Institute, there has been a waning of attendance and membership in Christian churches for years. Mm-hmm. And so what has happened is the pandemic has fast forwarded some issues that we were already wrestling with, exasperated some things, put some things on the table that I frankly think we need to get on the table.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, hey, I've heard it, it's cliche, never let a good crisis go to waste, man. I think that we are being challenged by a number of things in this pandemic. But I think that it's a wake-up call.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a wake-up call for those who agree to wake up.
Some people stay asleep.
If you want to stay asleep,
Days, wake up. No.
man, hey. I think that there are three things that are challenging churches today, insofar as attendance and baptisms. One would be obviously the pandemic. Mm-hmm. The pandemic has made people understandably wary of coming into closed spaces. Mm-hmm. And so one of the obvious reasons that we don't have people back at the rate that we would like them to come back is some people are understandably afraid of coming into contact with other people.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we underestimate the number of people who are absent because they don't feel safe.
Wow.
They don't feel safe. Number two, when they do come back, and to the extent that they come back, we are wrestling with some traumatized people. Last week I was in Anaheim, California, looking at, with a collection of pastors, the level of trauma that the pandemic has exasperated among not just members, but pastors. Mm-hmm. So what we're experiencing right now, not so much in the Adventist church, but certainly beyond the Adventist church, is what they call the Great Resignation. A significant percentage. As a matter of fact, it was well over 30% of Christian ministers were presently and actively considering the option of leaving the pastoral ministry.
Wow. Come on.
And again, it's because it's always been challenging to pastor.
Yeah.
Always been challenging to pastor. But when you bring the pandemic into the mix, and when you bring people back to church, or people who are tangentially connected to the church with their trauma into the picture, man, it's difficult. Just think about it. I just flew back from California, and I noticed the interactions between stewards and passengers to be a little bit more tense than it once was. The reports we see on YouTube of passengers attacking passengers and whatever. I mean, we live in an evil age, but this is crazy, man. Mm-hmm. I'm literally seeing people drive up to a McDonald's window, get into an argument with them, and jump through the window. I'm like, man, this is crazy. And the point is, things have always been bad. They've gotten progressively worse. But the pandemic has traumatized people to the extent that we've not been traumatized before, and we are not immune to it in the local church. Mm-hmm. So your jobs are going to be even more difficult.
Yeah. Right. And I would suggest or wonder if it's not just the pandemic, but during the pandemic, we had all the social justice issues
Oh, yeah,
come on the table. We had an election, a national election.
Absolutely.
And so you have these polarizations that have all added and come on top of a pandemic.
That's a good point.
And then
Good
like
point.
now, there was a potluck shooting today, and another church. And so those things in more recent history, I pastor a church that has about 200 something members. I have buried since March of 2020 over 90 something people. Not buried personally, but church members and relatives of church members. Got a call this morning, lost another member this morning. And so when you talk about pastors, and it's like, oftentimes I'm sitting here feeling like, man, I don't know, how am I going to bear? You know, I lost my own father during this time. And so pastors, you know, trying to carry everybody else's stuff as well as their own stuff in the midst of all of this. I wonder if that is leading to some inattention to local congregations from the pastoral level, that is maybe causing some of the people to say, hey, you know, pastor's checked out, or maybe only halfway checked in. So maybe
I can understand it, and I fully accept it, that a pastor is as human as a member is human, with the extra burden of these ideas about pastoring, superhero. You're not susceptible to the same issues that I'm susceptible to. I tell you one piece of good news that's coming out of the reports on trauma. For the first time in my memory, a significant percentage of Christians are reporting a level of comfort in going to counselors beyond their local pastors. That's a good thing.
That's good. That's real good.
That's a good thing, man.
That's real good.
So you talked about some principles, right? And you talked about the principle of having a safe place. I think you talked about that. You talked about trauma. What are some other principles from that?
For
meeting?
pastors and non-pastors alike, I think the primary call to action now is self-care.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself, man.
Okay.
I'm not talking about an insular, selfish self-care. It's almost a contradiction of the term, but you got to take care of your health. You got to take care of your family. Ellen White says our first duty toward God and our fellow beings is that of self-development. So the point is, if you're not good for you, you're not good for me. And so physically, you know, how am I doing physically? How is my diet? You know, what type of relationship am I forging with my family? That stuff plays out in way. And yet if you don't deal with it, it's coming out.
it eats away,
Yeah, man, it's gonna come out and it's gonna come out in some way. So I think that self-care is extremely important. I think for pastors, and I'm talking about pastors now dealing with this trauma, is the being free to say no. And see, that's hard, man.
That's brilliant.
Who you telling?
We want to say yes, yes, yes to everything, right?
We do.
Yes, I'll do it. I'll do it.
We do, and I'm talking to myself. I'm advising myself as I'm talking, because that's a whole lot easier said than done. But I found out that if you don't have boundaries, people will put their desires and they got tasks and they got chores for you to do. In a vacuum, they'll put anything and everything that they want, and it might not work to your advantage.
Pastor, I know you're real busy and you're overwhelmed right now, but
And even if they don't say it the way that you just said, that's what they meant.
So again, pastors got to take care of ourselves. It's more difficult to pastor now than before.
Definitely.
So in reviving our church now, reviving the attendance, what are some of the things that, as a pastor, we need to do to revive or should we even revive the in-person attendance of the church?
Yeah, because that's exactly where I wanted to go with that. Because one of the things that we consistently heard pastors and clergy type people say during this pandemic is the church is not the building. You know, we dug that thing and ran that thing into the ground. And so, but now that the church is open, the building is open, pastors are a lot the ones who are saying, oh, but man, where's everybody at?
That's because the church is not only the building. The church is not only the building. We can fully understand that the church is an individual, but when people talk about the church as the Bible defines it, there's certain characteristics of the church that go beyond you as an individual.
Okay.
And there's certain characteristics of a church that online or virtual can do well. Mm-hmm. There's certain characteristics of a church that virtual can't do at all in the way that people want it. The number one thing is community. You can forge a type of community virtually, but the type of one another's that the Bible talks about that will grow you, that will take advantage of. Dion's got certain gifts. He's got the gift of administration. He might have the gift of helps. He has certain gifts that I benefit from, and me when we're in the context of community. That can be done to an extent online, but you can't do it the same way. The whole dynamic of touch. Mm-hmm. Oh man, there is nothing accidental about the number of passages that talk about the healing that came out of the touch of Jesus Christ. Okay. There's something that is to be said for the touch. And then there's a dynamic. We just talked about Gil Jones-Murphy. Gil Jones-Murphy is an instrumentalist extraordinaire. Mm-hmm. So we were at Hampton 2 weeks ago, Hampton's Ministers Conference. Mm-hmm. They did More Love to Thee, O Christ, and they did another song as a prayer response. Here's my point. I've seen that online, mm-hmm. and it's impressive. But when you in the room,
okay.
It's like it goes, my wife said the same thing, it's like it goes through you.
Yes.
There's a dynamic about in-person worship that cannot be fully duplicated online, although it's not an either or. I think it's a both and.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, Pastor Paul, that it seems like you're saying, Dr. Wilson, that there is a need to revive the in-person attendance.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's no question.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a need to revive that attendance. So in reviving this attendance, what are some of the things that we can do? Because people don't want, like you said in your workshop, one of the reasons why people do not really want to come to church, maybe because they don't want to be so close to each other, social distancing, you know what I mean, trying to keep safe, don't want to get COVID.
And this, how do I top Sabbath school in curlers and fuzzy slippers and Fruit Loops in the building? How do I beat that? What can I do in the building?
I think the question, let's go to some takeaways. And we talked about evangelism and attendance. Right. I think the question that a lot of pastors they raise is it better or worse mm-hmm. to do church in person or virtually? The question that people are asking is not, is it better or worse? They're asking, is it worth it? They're not arguing that it might be better to be in a building. They're asking the question, is it worth it for me to be in that building? Exactly. Yeah. So I think that we could enhance the value of what our local churches are doing by being much more intentional about what they've been asking for, so that instead of a come and see me type of service, mm-hmm. it would be a more community oriented. By community, I mean trying to get them engaged with each other. One pastor did something that I think was simple but significant. He just knocked stuff out of his foyer so that people could have more space to engage each other safely. That's good. Yeah. So he found ways to manipulate the physical space mm-hmm. so that people could get that community that they said they were looking for. We talked earlier about the need for us to at least attempt to do small groups, not just small groups virtually, which I think is great, but how can we find ways to get people to come alongside each other, maybe according to their affinities, and to get the type of community that they need. But when it comes to church growth, some of it is, and we talked about that, the first thing I would say to a pastor is don't expect these people to come back. I would kind of lower the bar. And no, I'm not. I'm saying there were a lot of outliers. There were a lot of people who were on the perimeter that were kind of looky-loos. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a responsibility to them or for them, but they have found a number of different reasons to check out, and some of them are legitimate. They might be going to places that serve their needs better. So you got what you got. Right. Build on what you have. I would go back to basic, fundamental, theological understandings of what the church means. What do you as a local church have a responsibility for as a witness or a disciple? Something strange came out of some research from Barna that we were looking at last week, and that is the young millennials, and the point is there seems to be more of a desire these days for substantive thought and for theology at a level that, perhaps the other exactly. Right. What they said was, just to be a little bit more just brazen, is they're sick of cool church. In other words, they came up in a generation that thought that the best way for you to grow, or the best way to attract a crowd, is to be as much like the crowd as you possibly can. And don't get me wrong, I believe in contextualizing what you do, but now they see that a lot of that was lighter than it needed to be. They want something that is substantive theologically, and I think that good practice flows out of good theology. And so, I think that's one of the things that we should be doing. Then there's some other pragmatic things that we could do. But Dion, you want to know some pragmatic stuff, man?
So I'm not gonna say it.
I'll say it, man. Why are you scared?
I am. Because I know my audience. But
okay, wait a minute. What is that? No, but
so I'll say this though. I think that as far as Adventism, I'm gonna say what I was gonna say and still get in trouble. Adventism, I think that's a potential strength that we have, is that we have. Now, see, I don't want to say that because that makes it sound like other folk don't have.
I get you.
But yeah, a lot of times we have a potential and a history of being able to provide some of the more cerebral, substantive stuff that often now gets kind of trashed.
It does, because it's not being delivered in conjunction with fellowship and community. Content alone is not going to do it, but content and community will set that thing on fire. Oh yeah, man, that's good. Man, that's why they pay me the big bucks, man.
Jesus mingled, right? And then bid them follow me.
But you're right about there is a desire for the very content that we do. You can't out-content us.
Right. But you can out some of that other stuff. Not that you can. Most people.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about revitalizing the church. I like the direction. I like the principles that you gave. You also had a chart or a picture. Those three principles. You had deliverance, and then there was another line in there, and deployment.
I'm glad you don't remember, because you're not stealing my stuff down. So it's three.
What he did was he said, you didn't teach me well enough.
I had to leave one blank, so let me go. I think it's deliverance, development, or whatever deployment. But go ahead, Doc.
So it's what I call a discipleship or evangelism funnel.
Right.
One of the challenges that and I know with public and personal evangelism is our retention rate is abysmal, man. You bring them in and they're gone. Well, one of the causes of that, one of the reasons for that is that, and this is just a cliche, we have a tendency to be better at bringing in members than developing disciples.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cerebral, but not relational.
Well, I think that the discipleship process just structures in the mind of the church what stages the church needs to take the non-believer through to move from non-believer to mature believer. What are the steps? What are the non-believer, the new believer, the mature believer? So for me, what has worked well is in my mind and in visuals that I've created for my members, we take the church evangelistically in our efforts through three stages. The first stage is deliverance.
That's the funnel, like a funnel.
Exactly. Second stage is development. Third stage is deployment. So when we see a person that's in the streets that's a non-believer,
yes,
our first stage is to get them connected to Jesus, and that could be done a number of different ways. But in the interest of time, that's the deliverance stage. They move from death to life, they're part of the kingdom. But then once they become a part of the church, our responsibility through the classic spiritual disciplines, through Sabbath school, through a lot of different services, is to develop them. That's the sanctification stage. which never ends. But to Bill's argument, it's an event and it's a process. But that's for another day.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning my arguments with him right now, man.
Developing it, yeah.
But then the third stage,
Yes.
which is probably the most neglected stage,
That's right.
is the deployment stage. You came in, you're taking in all of this great content, but you're not doing anything with it.
Come on.
Right.
So we want to not just bring them in, we want to bring them in, build them up, and then send them out.
Yes.
And so, as I was telling Dion, what we have is not novel. I mean, those are my three. Those D's work for me. As a matter of fact, Bill Hull is a discipleship guru that 30 or 40 years I got connected to, and his stuff has helped me. But your intake, that process that you just described, that you take members through post-baptism is amazing. Now, it's not novel, but it's yours. You've tweaked it. And I think everybody can come up with a discipleship process that's intentional, that says this is what our church offers to move them from immaturity to maturity and then to get back out in the areas of outreach. So that's what we do.
Good stuff.
That's good stuff. Listen.
Hey man, this was all free today, man.
I know.
This is huge.
That's what you think.
I don't know if there's any final words.
You didn't give him our address, right? he didn't know where to send the bill.
What did you think? But I don't know if there's any final words, any nuggets that you want to give our listening audience. We're talking to the South Central Conference, the churches there. What are some of the things that, any final words you want to give?
The best is yet to come. Hey, that's all I say. Hey man, this is my conference. You can drop me in about any place in this conference. I know where I am because I grew up here.
Okay.
I've been coming to to camp meetings since I was like 7 or 8 years old.
Oh my.
So that means I've just been coming for about 5 or 10 years. So the point is this, I love this conference,
Right.
and I think that the potential, let's back up from the potential. I think that they have one of the most progressive, kindest pastoral presidents that there is in Ben Jones.
Okay.
The reason I raise Ben's name is because he's pastoral, but he surrounded himself with others who might have different types of gifts. And so the team here is good. So my point is this. I think that the best is yet to come for South Central, and I'm just glad for the little part that I get to play over at the Bradford Cleveland Brooks Leadership Center. Man, just a small part, but I love it.
Well, South Central, look, this morning we hope today we hope that you are enjoying Camp Meeting 2022. If you're watching this at a later date, you should have been here. You could have caught nuggets like these and in the workshops that Dr. Wilson gave and many others gave. And we just hope that as you look forward to next year's camp meeting, that you mark your calendar, mark your date so that you can come and experience some things like this will help you revitalize, rethink, rejuvenate the mission that God has placed on your shoulders back in your home church. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Henry, any final words from you?
Listen, I'm just so glad you said yes, that you were going to come. I'm so glad. But God bless you, South Central Conference. And by God's grace, these things that we learned today will help us to move this work forward.
We're nearing home.
Good stuff.